Welcome, everyone, to the Q&A session for our upcoming course, The Near-Death Experience, where spirituality and science meet. The 7-week soul-evolving journey into the binding force of love and purposeful living. I'm Lisa Bonise, and I am so excited to be hosting this Q&A conversation for the Shift Network, where we'll explore the teachings of Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell and address questions about their upcoming 7-week course, The Near-Death Experience, where spirituality and science meet, which begins Monday, August 17th. And a little later, I'll explain how you can participate in the course. Even if you can't attend the live sessions, we're aware that the time doesn't work for everybody, but that's okay. First, I want to introduce our guests. After decades as a physician and teacher at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Eben Alexander experienced a transcendental near-death experience, or NDE. Memories of his life had been completely deleted, yet he awoke with memories of a fantastic odyssey deep into another realm. And since his 2008 NDE, he's been reconciling his rich spiritual experience with contemporary physics and cosmology, concluding that we are consciousness in spite of our brain. His books, Proof of Heaven, A Neurosurgeon's Journey into the Afterlife, which was published in 40-plus languages, and The Map of Heaven, How Science, Religion, and Ordinary People Are Proving the Afterlife, have collectively spent more than 2 years on the New York Times and international bestseller lists. And then Karen Newell, co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, is an innovator in the emerging field of brainwave entrainment audio meditation, empowering others in their journeys of self-discovery. Using Sacred Acoustics recordings, she teaches how to connect to inner guidance, inspire creativity, improve wellness, develop intuition, and align with higher purpose. She's the co-author with Dr. Alexander of the book Living in a Mindful Universe, a neurosurgeon's journey into the heart of consciousness, which has garnered accolades from many scientists around the world who study the mind-body question and the nature of consciousness. And in just a few minutes, we're going to open up for your questions. But first, I want to bring Eben and Karen online. Welcome, Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell. It's so good to see you today.
Well, hello, Lisa. Thanks so much for having us on. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. We're looking forward to answering these many questions. Very interesting.
Yes, we've got a lot of questions. We have the rest of our time together to dive into our viewers' questions for Eben and Karen as we prepare once again for their upcoming course, which is called The Near-Death Experience, where spirituality and science meet, which begins Monday, August 17th. And if you want to check out the website, sort of follow along with us and learn more about the 7-week course, you can visit the website as you see down on the bottom of the screen below. So let's go ahead and get into some questions. If you have a question for Eben or Karen, go ahead and type your question in and I'll be happy to read them. And in the meantime, we've got a lot of questions already lined up, so let's dive right in. First, let's start with a question from Judy. It says, this is a question for Eben, but Karen, I'd love for you to chime in as well. As a result of what you have learned because of your near-death experience, do you believe that we are all here on Earth for a single purpose, for example, to help one another, to spread love, or do each of us have a specific or unique purpose in this lifetime?
That's a beautiful question, and I would say that the answer is really kind of a combination, and that is I've come to realize that I believe the entire reason the universe exists is for sentient beings to basically go through their soul evolution and come to learn more about their oneness and connectedness with the universe at large. Every single one of us as a soul is involved in this process of growth and through learning and teaching in this thing I would call soul school in this world. And yet in many ways, there is a common purpose, at least when viewed, say, through the lens of the last 5,000 years of human history. And that is that we are here to learn what humans now would interpret as this beautiful message of oneness and love, kindness, compassion, and mercy. That is the foremost lesson for humanity to learn now. And even though people will say, well, we've always known that love is important, I would say that this world has not really lived that truth. And that is what we are waking up to. That is what this awakening in consciousness is really all about, is that grander evolution of of all of consciousness towards that deep truth of the binding force of love, but we all approach it through our own lifetimes and our own life events. And I suspect Karen has a lot to add to this.
Well, that's the part that I would add, is that, yes, there is sort of a common kind of thing that binds us all together. We call it the binding force of love, and that is an underlying theme for all of us, but each of us is unique. Each of us brings in a unique flavor, I would say, to the whole. So if all of consciousness is one mind, which is a philosophy we ascribe to, each of us brings a unique aspect. And so it really is upon each of us to determine what is that purpose that we're here for. And don't think of it as something that you have to necessarily do, but it's a way of being. It's a way of aligning with that higher self, that higher aspect of you, and bringing that authentic spiritual you into this lifetime and really bring that into your daily way of living. And that way we're not just, operating on the surface of being a mother, a teacher. We're actually bringing that authentic, unique nature into our daily life. And yes, it often is partly related to that binding force of love. But again, that unique flavor of who we are, that's what we're here to really live and bring forth.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. I think this is a great way to start out the conversation. Now, Eben, I know, perhaps Karen as well, I know that this is a common question, so let's dive right into this one. This is from Ron, who says, for my skeptical colleagues, what's the best scientific, not anecdotal evidence that the NDE, including rising above the body, is not some kind of hallucination that the brain is manufacturing?
Well, I think that's where our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, is very important. And of course, much of what we will be covering in this course is all of the scientific data that supports this thinking. It turns out that, the answer to what happens when we die will never fully be uncovered just by addressing near-death experiences. And the reason, of course, is because those people don't die. And yet anyone who pays attention to this literature will realize that it's amazing that people report these kind of similar stories literally by the millions out there in approaching death. But the bigger point would be, as we make in our book, and in many of our presentations, and we'll make in this course, is when you look at consciousness from many different perspectives, there's something called consilience. In modern science, where, for example, if we were looking at quantum physics, and just as the founding fathers of quantum physics surmised decades ago, consciousness is fundamental. There's something primary and united about consciousness that's very difficult to explain. And in fact, those experiments have gotten more and more refined to point out the necessity of putting consciousness as primary in the universe, primary and causal. And yet you get to the same answer of the fundamental nature of consciousness if you look at, for example, the hard problem of consciousness, which is the impossibility of trying to explain through physical science alone how consciousness could arise from the brain. Or look at philosophy of mind, something called the binding problem, which is this fact that consciousness for any one of us is very unified. It's not like a patchwork quilt of all those neuronal populations doing all their different things in the brain that somehow gets assembled, but in fact, it seems to be very unified. And then there's all the examples from psi phenomena and parapsychology of non-local consciousness. That is the reality of remote viewing, that we can discern things at a great distance and different times, and glean that information through kind of non-ordinary channels. That's been proven beyond any reasonable doubt scientifically. Out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, clairvoyance, telepathy, these are all examples. Shared death experiences, which are like near-death but occur in people who are physiologically normal. When you look at this huge, broad category of different kind of examples of consciousness that defy materialist explanation, what you find is altogether they provide consilience in a scientific understanding. I would send anyone who wants to short circuit right to the science on this. One good resource is GalileoCommission.org. If you go to that site, I'm one of the 100+ scientific advisors to that group. You will see how this is all about the modern science of consciousness that really is showing us this profound potential for human human beings.
Hmm. All right. Thank you for that and for that link. That's very helpful. So, Karen, let's talk a little bit about Horst specifically is asking, how does the sacred acoustic work, especially in relation to NDEs?
Well, we use a form of brainwave entrainment in our sacred acoustics recordings, and these are specifically designed to help the listener get into a quieter state. And so when we can put all of those distracting thoughts aside, get the body profoundly relaxed, we find that our awareness becomes a little more alert. And this is the foundation for achieving some of the similar states that near-death experiencers have. So when in the course, we're going to be using the Grayson scale. This was created by psychiatrist Bruce Grayson in order to quantify and measure different features of near-death experiences. So he has 16 of these different features. And one of them, for example, is a state of time either going very, very fast or very, very slow. And so when time starts to shift, this is a state that we can achieve while listening to these types of recordings. Of course, you can achieve it in other types of experiences as well. For example, if you're just on your way commuting on a route that you drive on every single day, sometimes if it normally takes an hour, sometimes it might feel like it only took 10 minutes. These are the types of consciousness states that near-death experiencers get into. Now, that isn't to say that we are having the same kind of experience when we get into that zone. But if we can start to achieve these different features alone, the state of no time, a state of pure awareness, losing the awareness of the physical body, those sorts of things, we start to conglomerate and realize that we can access those same consciousness states, and the sound can help us get there by helping to quiet the mind and relax the body profoundly enough that we can start to find our way there. And this includes, for example, seeing future events or more clearly understanding past events. All of these kinds of things that happen in near-death experiences, we can achieve ourselves through cultivation.
And Lisa, if I could just add one thing, it's these sounds are also, they're processed in a completely different and more primitive part of the brain than most of the sounds we're used to listening to. They're processed in the lower brainstem. And I think that's one of the reasons, and we'll touch on this certainly in our course material, but I think it's one of the reasons why such profound kind of separation from consciousness of the here and now and in the physical body can be accomplished through these sacred acoustics tones.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. This leads into several questions. I'm going to try to compile them into one. People are saying that they would love to have a near-death experience without having to die, that they would love to experience the sonic acoustics, but they're afraid that if they really allow themselves to let go, that they might actually cross over, as it were. So how can we, I guess, really experience what we're talking about without actually dying? And how can we participate in these sound sessions without crossing over and being able to come back?
Well, that fear is very real. That fear is something that, I've experienced. When you get into these states and it's unfamiliar and you're not really certain what's going on, that can cause that fear. But I will tell you that I know of 0 examples, not one example, and I've been doing this for quite a while, of anyone who has gone into one of these states while listening to these recordings and not come back. The thing is, we're not duplicating exactly a near-death experience. Even Eben will tell you when he returns to those realms using these types of recordings, he's not duplicating that hyper-real realm, but we can touch it. We can get aspects of it. And so this fear of not coming back is common and related to that fear of death. And so this would be a very interesting thing to explore for those who have that type of fear, because the more we can become comfortable within our own consciousness and realize that awareness is really the part of us that we should be identifying with more so than the physical body, the awareness stays with us when we die. So the more we can experience that here and now by having these types of experiences, then we are going to reduce that fear when the time actually comes. And really, these types of experiences, whether it's a near-death experience or not, people want to have a near-death experience, but you can also have what's called a spiritually transformative experience, and they can be just as powerful. And very often, it doesn't involve any kind of physical risks at all. In fact, that's how I've personally done this, is I've cultivated my ability to connect with these types of realms, connect with these states of consciousness with not ever having any physical ailment at all, specifically through using these types of sound recordings and also other forms of meditation. Many times I will recommend that it's a combination of techniques that can help get us there. But we're going to do this in very small steps. It will be profound each step, but we're not going to go right to let's cross over. No, we're just going to practice that pure state of awareness. We're going to practice generating a feeling of joy, and we're going to do this in a very stepwise process. So all of those fears are related very likely to that fear of death, that fear of what happens when we die. And these are some of the things that we will address so that those kinds of things can be helped.
Yeah, I would simply add that I've been very pleased over the last decade or so of doing this kind of work with Karen. We've given hundreds of workshops or meditation play shops to people. And she's right. You're not at risk of not returning or some horrific damage. And one of the best things about all this is by exploring in consciousness, when you realize that your brain is not the producer of consciousness, but is a filter that allows primordial consciousness in. What we're talking about in these meditations is ways to traverse that veil, to thin that veil and gain tremendous experience in exploring consciousness. And with that experience, time and again comes trust. We come to realize that with love in our heart, that these explorations will always be for the higher good of all involved, and that there really is nothing to fear at all.
Right. Thank you. That was a beautiful explanation. Thank you so much. Let me combine a couple questions here. One person's asking, based on your NDE, where do you believe we go after our time ends on Earth? And then there's another similar question from Sharon who says, what do the spirits who have passed from this physical world do once they're in heaven? I don't imagine they're just mingling around and certainly not sitting on a cloud with a harp.
No, they're not. And what you really have to get to here is realizing, in our bodies, in this physical world, we're under this kind of illusion that the physical world out there is just as it appears, external to us. And yet one of the deepest and most profound lessons of the modern science on consciousness is that none of it exists independently of mind. So in many ways, that external physical reality and the illusion of here, now, and a sense of self is something that we can step outside of and grow beyond. And I think that's an important point in terms of asking, where is all this happening? Well, it's happening in many ways much closer to our kind of mental existence than this world is. And it's one of the reasons why we can so readily, through prayer and meditation and spontaneous epiphanies, things like that, we can come to be in the presence of our loved ones who have left the physical world. Now, they often will present to us, say, for example, in dreams. And other people, for example, use certain psychedelic substances, plant medicines, entheogens, like LSD, ayahuasca, DMT, to again thin the veil and kind of get in touch with these alternate spiritual realms. But they're right here where we are. That's the important thing. And the real illusion, or Maya, is actually that physical world out there. So this is really about exploring the multiple different potential levels of spiritual realms, and we can touch on them through dreams and through psychedelic drug experiences, But the important thing to point out is that those are like glimpsing through a keyhole. To anyone who's had a profound NDE will tell you, those ultra real, meaningful experiences are something you'll remember the rest of your life, even if you live 80 more years, as if it just happened yesterday. These are shockingly real experiences that have to do with a reality that is in many ways more fundamental than the material realm. And that was one thing that shocked me no end with my NDE, was the ultra reality of it, as Karen mentioned earlier. And with all of my meditative efforts in the decade since, I've been able to develop a very robust, interactive kind of relationship with all the denizens of that realm and that incredibly healing force of love, that God force at the core of it all. But this is something all of us can do through these meditative techniques. You don't need to be smoked down by meningitis or run over by a truck. You can cultivate it as a conscious being. And that's what this course will be all about.
Okay, perfect. That actually leads beautifully into the next question. A lot of people are asking, what are your thoughts on guardian angels, angels in particular? How can we communicate with the angelic realm? That's a big picture version of the question.
Do you want me to start, Ebby?
I would start by saying that those who have read Proof of Heaven will realize that I had a beautiful experience with my guardian angel. In fact, it was recognizing who she was, which didn't really happen for me until 4 months after my coma, that really opened my mind to the deep reality of that. And in my meditation since that time, I've come to see that guardian angels play a tremendous role, really for all of us. And one of my favorite I've met so many people on this beautiful pathway, and that includes someone like Lorna Byrne, who is an Irish woman who just has she's written several beautiful books, one called Angels in My Hair, which I think was her first work. But she basically, from early childhood, was seeing guardian angels around everyone. And I think that that's very true. I've certainly come to realize my guardian angel is with me. Even when I can't see her, I can feel her presence very strongly. And I think Karen probably has a lot to add about guardian angels.
Well, I just wanted to point out that, when we're met, what we understand when we leave this world in the transition of death, we're actually met by our loved ones, people that we knew here on earth. And so Eben had his guardian angel was actually a family member that he didn't know here on earth, but that was a biological family member that he didn't know of. And so sometimes that's the case, that our guardian angels are people that we've interacted with in different ways here on earth. But other times, Lorna's book will explain that sometimes these guardian angels aren't earthly beings at all, that they are different and they have a different role to play. And Lorna will talk about seeing one particular main guardian angel around every person on earth who has one, and they're dressed different ways and they have different ways of appearing to her. And so these are not the same type of what Eben is calling a guardian angel that he met on the other side, who was actually a loved one. So I think sometimes you're going to think of human soulmates as angels, but there's also this other type of angelic realm that is not human at all. And it's not necessarily our area of expertise, but Lorna Byrne is one of the strongest resources on that around, I believe.
All right, thank you for that, and thank you for the referral to Lorna Byrne. She's wonderful. Gosh, so many questions. Where do we go next? Let's talk about pets, because again, a lot of people are asking. Let me read this specific question. Please talk about our pets that have passed. Are those visitation dreams real? And why is the grief when a pet passes so universally unique, excruciatingly painful, and seems to never lessen as when our human loved ones pass?
Well, I'll start with that one. We get asked that question quite a lot. And I think it's because when we talk about this binding force of love, so many of us feel that love towards our pets. And of course, pets don't have issues. We don't really have, conflicts with our pets. Our pets seem to just unconditionally love us no matter what. You can come home in a bad mood and still there they are. It's very different than humans. And so I think that's why we have this more special type of bond with our pets. And because they all pretty much have shorter lifespans than us, many of us go through loss of a pet several times during our lives because we have a pet, they pass, and we get another pet. And so we are very aware that mediums tell us and other hypnotherapists tell us that when people encounter the other side, they see their pets there. We are connected as one consciousness, not just humans, but all consciousness, which includes animals, all animals on Earth, the wild animals and the domestic animals. But it's those domestic animals that we develop those bonds with. And I know Eben can tell you that he actually witnessed dogs on his coma journey, right, Eben?
Yes, well, that was one of the most beautiful aspects of that, the Gateway Valley, which was kind of a midway realm between the lowest spiritual realms that I encountered and the highest, the loftiest, the core realm. And the Gateway Valley was loaded with kind of earth-like features, and yet it had a tremendous amount of spiritual energy to it, too. But one of the beautiful things was the incredible festivity, all the joy and merriment I saw. And when I wrote it all up weeks later, I described this beautiful scene of this meadow that was filled with thousands of beings. And in my writings, I expressed that they were souls between lives. But all of that joy and merriment in that realm was being fueled because of these angelic choirs that were swooping above and emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would just thunder through me and just enliven that entire scene. But one of the prettiest and most memorable aspects of that scene is that children were playing there in this realm of between lifetimes of souls that were no longer incarnate, and dogs were jumping and having tremendous fun with them, and all of it was fueled because of those angelic choirs emanating down from above. As a neuroscientist, it's important to point out that we often, in fact, science in the mid-20th century got badly off track in thinking that animals might not even be conscious because they were so enamored with the linguistic brain, the little voice in our head. But as Karen and I often teach in our workshops, you should view that voice in your head as your annoying roommate. And a lot of the knowledge and gnosis that we'll be talking about in this course is from experience and direct connection with the primordial mind of the universe, and not something where you think your way to it with that linguistic brain. The linguistic center is, in fact, something that gets in the way of our spirituality that I think for animals is much more natural and flowing. And that's why that pure emotional, heartfelt connection that we often feel with our pets is such a beautiful indicator of the oneness of mind that we're sharing. And it's a beautiful gift to re-enliven that because we have a tremendous amount of commonality with animals. And in fact, humans have gotten off track in what we do in this world in terms of some of the damage to the ecosystems and all, which is not good for the animals. And really, we're all in this together. And I think one of the grand parts of this awakening in consciousness is recognizing that we share a beautiful, loving consciousness with the animal and plant kingdoms.
And I would just add, someone asked if those visitation dreams were real, and that's what's called an after-death communication. When your pet has left and they come back and visit you in a dream, it's an after-death communication, same as a human. So I think you can validate that just as much as if it was your grandmother, if it was your dog or beloved pet.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure that that answered a lot of people's questions. And for those of you who are just joining us, we're here with Dr. Eben Alexander and Karen Newell learning about their upcoming course, The Near-Death Experience, where spirituality and science meet, which begins Monday, August 17th. And you can log on ndescienceandspirituality.com for all the details and to register. And that's printed out at the bottom of your screen in case you didn't follow along with what I was saying. So let's get back into questions. Boy, do we have a lot of them. This is from Nita. It's more of a comment, but I'll add a question on the end. She says, I have not had an NDE, but as my husband lay dying in my arms, I had an incredible moment as his soul left his body. I was touched or glanced by the tip of a wing or a hand or whoever came to guide his soul. I was instantly filled with an incredible love that goes beyond this world and anything mankind can give. Every cell of my body was filled instantly with divine love, and then I knew everything would be okay. So my question is, I've heard of shared death experiences. Is that what this would be?
I would say, yes, this is certainly a form of a shared death experience, and they're actually a beautiful category of experiences to study. I know when I first gave talks about my experience back in 2 years before Proof of Heaven came out, that was back in 2010, many people would come up to me and share their own NDE or maybe an after-death communication, but every now and then I'd get an incredible story of a shared death, and I wasn't even sure I didn't even know that term at the time. Shared death experiences can have the identical qualities and events that occur in a near-death experience, but they happen to somebody who is normally physiologically healthy, say a loved one at the bedside of a dying loved one. Or you could be 1,000 miles away from that bedside, because in those spiritual realms, distance is not a limiting factor. And I've heard many stories of people. In fact, one of the most common things I would hear from people is that the greatest gift that they got from a loved one was a profound kind of example, a concrete example of that ongoing connection, even through beyond death of the physical body. As in a shared death experience. And what is often described in some of the most extraordinary ones is that the soul of the bystander gets whisked along with the soul of the departing, dying loved one, even to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review of the departing soul before the bystander soul comes back to this world. So shared death experiences are absolutely stunning. I will credit Dr. Raymond Moody. Of course, many are aware that he wrote the book Life After Life in 1975. That was where he first coined the term near-death experience and really started this tremendous revolution. But he also wrote a book, I believe it was in 2011, called Glimpses of Eternity. And that was of all the shared death cases that he had assembled over many decades. And they're not as common as NDEs, but they are so extraordinary and completely obliterate that materialist science pseudo-explanation for NDEs about diminishing oxygen tension in the brain or increased CO2 levels in the brain when we're dying, because these people are not dying, and yet they have the same phenomenal experience. And it's a beautiful factor that outgoing souls will share that with a loved one, so the loved one can come back and tell the tale.
I would add there's another resource that this questioners might be interested in. William Peters started an organization called Shared Crossing Project, and he actually teach people how to engender these states. And what he told us most recently is that it's the person who's dying. So someone who knows they're going to be dying, who has a terminal illness or who's at the end of their life, they can learn certain ways of being so that on their way out, they can connect with their loved ones. And as Eben said, this is just the most beautiful gift that anyone can give us when when they're on their way out, because it, just like that woman so beautifully explained, she knew without any doubts that everything would be okay. And that's what we all really want to feel in that moment, that everything's going to be okay. So these examples can really help make us realize that that truly is the case. And I love how they don't have anything physiologically wrong with them. And so they still have the same type of experiences that the dying explain. So isn't that something?
It really is. Thank you for that explanation. Let's go to another facet of relationships. Here's a question from Ron, who says, I was married for 40 years before my wife's death 6 years ago, and now I'm in love with another woman on this plane. How does that work on the other side? When I pass, what happens? Is monogamy the standard, or does love trump everything?
I'd like to answer that one. I believe that the wife he has on the other side is incredibly happy for him in this moment, because he has found a way to express love while still here and not still be in grief. And so many times we hear that that is the case, that loved ones who've passed want us to find other relationships. Well, how do we know this? There's another person that we are very familiar with named Jeff Olsen, Olsen, and he had this near-death experience where he lost his wife and child in a car accident. And there was a surviving child, and the two of them, the father and child, went on with their lives. But he missed his wife and child so deeply. And how was he to move on? And the same thing happened. He met someone else. And this was something that they had to work through. But because he still kind of had this connection to the other side, he was able to realize that his former wife, was very supportive of this relationship. And it got even to the point where the two wives were able to communicate with each other. Now, this isn't to make it turn into some fantastic type of story that you shouldn't believe. This was through meditation, through dreams, through all kinds of normal things that we do in our lives. And so we all can develop this. In their case, it was a beautiful lesson of how love has no boundaries. And yes, moving on to another spouse often is very much approved. So when you get to the other side, I have a feeling it all just works out. I don't believe that you need to be concerned about that at all. And it's very likely that your former wife and your new beloved somehow know each other, whether they know it on a, conscious level or deep inside. This is something that they probably are very well aware of. So bravo to you for moving on. That is a wonderful thing to hear.
I think this also brings up that interesting point. People talk about, yes, we already know that love is important, but it's crucial to point out that love, as we often express it and talk about it, especially romantic love in these physical bodies in this lifetime, is often very possessive. And the purest form of love is one that is unconditional, that does not attach any conditions whatsoever. And that real, true, heartfelt love for another is something that is not at all threatened. If one soul has left this world, if the remaining soul misses them so much and loves them so much that they express it through wanting to have another mate in this life, I think it all just works out beautifully with that unconditional love notion, and the fact that in that afterlife realm, all of these souls work together for the mutual growth, learning and teaching together. And that often can involve someone meeting someone new after they've lost a spouse to death. So it just points out how purely that unconditional love has a way of getting rid of all the rough edges and kind of possessive and kind of lesser qualities of what we call love in this world.
All right, thank you. And of course, that leads to another question. Karen, you mentioned grief, and we've got Elizabeth here asking, what about grief? How do we cope with grief? How do we get beyond that?
Well, it's very important to allow yourself to feel these feelings. And it can be very, some people get into grief and they have it for years and years and years. And what we've learned is that our loved one, somehow it's this, oftentimes the grief is related to some kind of loyalty to that person or missing them and wanting them to be here constantly. But what we've learned is that grief is another one of those challenges in life that gives us an opportunity to grow. And so we don't want to get lost in our grief. We're not specifically grief counselors, but there are stages of grief, and it's very important to allow yourself to experience those stages and not feel like just because you're still sad and it's been 6 months that something's wrong with you. But on the other hand, you want to find that joy in life. Your loved one will tell you that they want you to be happy and not miss them. Some people will even say that holding on to that person that we've lost too strongly will prevent them from moving on because they're so concerned about your grief. They're sticking close and they want to give you comfort. And so often we don't notice that. we don't feel it because we're so caught up in our grief. And so developing ways to relax into this, relax into the idea that their soul is still there with you. I know when my stepmother lost her dear sister to colon cancer, she would still have conversations with her in her mind. And it's not to say she was crazy, but she would stand in her closet and ask Marie, what should I wear today? And she would feel a certain kind of urge to an outfit. And this is a simple activity every day that made her still feel close to Marie, but also still accept that her body had left us. And so allow yourself to feel this grief and know with certainty that that soul is still alive in some fashion, is still there for you, and absolutely will be there for you when you pass to the other side.
I would simply add that I think a few decades ago, most scientists were hard on the pathway of materialism or physicalism, so they would say any such after-death communication or awareness of a loved one who has left the physical plane was a hallucination. And yet the modern study of consciousness has really gotten to a point where I think once you study the evidence, and this is a lot of what we'll be covering in this course that we'll be doing through the Shift Network, but once you study that, you realize the scientific community is actually very heavily in favor of the reality of a spiritual universe, and that we're spiritual beings, and that, in fact, our souls do remain connected. And once the physical body dies, it's not the end of our loved one. And much of what we're talking about in this course has to do with modes of being able to prove that to ourselves through meditative techniques. But the bigger kind of scientific worldview is one that is evolving very rapidly. And I would say within the next decade or two, no kind of self-respecting, well-read student of modern science will doubt the reality not only of the afterlife, but even of things like past life memories, suggesting that our souls can come back time and again in this process of growth and getting this right. And bereavement and grief are very different when you realize that you're still connected with a loved one, even though their physical body has left this world.
All right. Well, thank you for that comprehensive answer. I'm looking at the clock here. We have time for a few more questions, but before we take those, I'll go ahead and give a few details about the course because people are asking about that. Once again, it's called Near-Death Experience, where spirituality and science meet. And this is going to be just a phenomenal 7-week journey with Eben and Karen under their expert guidance, where you'll discover insights and practices, including powerful sound healing journeys, to access the knowledge and transformations of the near-death experience, even if you haven't had one yourself, so you can live a more love-filled, fearless, and purposeful life now. And the 7-week course takes place on Mondays at 1 a.m. Pacific, beginning Monday, August 17th. And as I mentioned earlier, if you can't join us live, that's fine. You won't miss any of the teachings because you'll receive audio and video recordings, transcripts, and all course handouts on your course homepage. Everything's all gathered in one place, and you can keep them forever. You're not limited to just the 7 weeks while the course is running. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving you a full 2 weeks until August 31st in this case, to make sure that you absolutely love it. And as an added option, all participants are welcome to connect in a private Facebook community group so you can connect with one another. Also, everyone who registers receives the Near-Death Experience, where spirituality and science meet bonus collection. And first, you'll receive a video dialogue with Eben and Neil Grossman entitled Unraveling Consciousness at the Scientific Frontier. And then you'll get a video teaching from Karen called Spirituality and Mental Health Brainwave Entrainment. Plus, you'll receive a PDF chapter from an ebook by Eben and Karen entitled Living in a Mindful Universe. And that's Chapter 11, Resolving a Key Question. So before we get back into questions, let me ask you, both Eben and Karen, what are you most looking forward to sharing in your upcoming course?
Well, one thing I would point out, I think in what you just described minutes ago, you said it would be at 1 a.m. Pacific time, which I assume is not exactly right. So we should probably clarify that time.
Okay, I thought I said 11 a.m., but it is 11
I
I
a.m.
guess I heard 1 a.m.,
I
but
think you
11
said
a.m.
1
Good.
a.m. Yeah.
Oh,
it's
okay.
PM.
Sorry, it is 11 a.m. I'm not sure how that came out of my mouth, but it's 11
There we
a.m.
go.
All right.
Good. And so I'm sorry,
So-
your question again?
Oh, what are you most looking forward to in this course? What has you really alive about what you're about to do?
Well, I must say one thing that for me has been the biggest gift about going public with my story is that thousands and thousands of souls have shared their story back with me. And it's been very affirmative and confirming of much of my work and understanding. So I really love the interaction and engagement. And certainly one thing I'm sensing about the Shift Network and the audience there is that there are a lot of advanced kind of seekers. And I look forward to interacting with all of that kind of audience, just because for me, it's very affirming. It helps me to put together a much better idea of how all this works by hearing many other people's experiences. So I just look forward to the engagement. I'm very excited about it.
Yes, and one of my favorite parts of doing this sort of thing is helping people to facilitate these types of experiences and to understand what is that's going on when I go into this deep state. Sometimes it can be very confusing. Sometimes we have very large expectations of these giant, vibrant, spiritual adventures. And sometimes it doesn't happen that way. And so I'm really looking forward to helping people really take apart either experiences they've already had or cultivate new experiences and really find that way to connect yourself. Each of us, as part of one mind, if each of us takes on that personal responsibility to get to know the inside of our own consciousness, to really learn to manage our inner world, this is how our outer world will start to change. And so each soul that comes along on the journey with us, we thank you very much for taking the time to do this. And our gratitude abounds for connecting with us in this way and really helping to understand that we are so much more than our physical bodies. And each of us can come to know that in our own way through cultivating this kind of experience.
I think so many people are under the illusion that near-death experiences are only valuable because they tell us what happens when we die. And of course, that's been an age-old question for all of humanity. And yet, in reality, what I think will become clear through this course and the way we present the material is that every choice we make on a daily basis depends on kind of the deepest answers to these kind of questions. And so to live our lives with any kind of meaning and purpose is greatly enhanced by addressing these kind of questions and issues and coming into this knowledge base, discussing experience, and really sharing every bit of that, because that's the true value of near-death experiences. And they do help to unite science and spirituality. But for the individual, they're most important because they really help to educate us about how to live, how to more fully see ourselves in relationship to the universe at large and with all of our fellow beings, and to come together into a win-win situation that really has to do with communicating better with our higher soul and that primordial mind.
And near-death experiences are known in the psychiatric world as providing the most transformational type of therapy you could imagine, just because of the after effects and how people really transform when they understand these greater things are going on, not just our physical world. And so by each of us learning to create this transformation in ourselves, Eben, I agree completely. It's more about how we bring that into our daily lives and make changes here and now, and not just, wonder what happens when we die. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm. All right, perfect. Thank you. Here's a question, again, a common question. We all hear about when we pass over, we go toward the light. And Elizabeth here says, I experienced the realm of divine love, which is immensely loving and peaceful. But ever since I could not find an answer why this realm was pitch black instead of bright light as others experience it.
Well, of course, that's something that I described in my journey in Proof of Heaven. and often talk about experiences, and we'll touch on certainly in this course on the Shift Network. But I ascended through multiple levels, and it began in that primitive earthworm eye view, and then that incredibly rich, ultra-real Gateway Valley. And yet going up through sound-related portals to higher and higher levels, I got to the core, which for me was my ultimate destination on this journey, beyond a perceived boundary. And the core is the pure oneness. It's all of infinity, eternity, that God force of pure love with a higher multidimensional universe compressed down into this complex oversphere. But the most impressive part about that was the unification of all. There's no more opposites, no more dualisms at all in that realm of pure love. And that's what I experienced as a dazzling darkness. That's the phrase I used in the book, and it makes the most sense to me. But it really, a lot of this is nonsensical because our language kind of forces a certain kind of interpretation, a certain kind of syntax, a certain kind of structure, which is not part of the fundamental reality. And that's one of the reasons why, instead of talking about it and kind of sharing my experience and expecting people to kind of get involved and on board because of that, it's much more important to take them there. And that's why I love the work that I've done with Karen over the last decade plus. That's what we'll be bringing to this course, because it's a consolidation of that. But it's really all about having people share in that experience themselves through these very powerful techniques that we have. No more talking about it. Let's live it and go through personal experience. That's what we want to engender.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's get back into the sound aspects of the work. Dan is asking, can that feeling of unconditional love that Eben is talking about be generated by a particular frequency for the specific purpose of healing?
Well, that's an interesting question. And there are a lot of sound healers out there who claim that there is one particular frequency that will deliver a specific effect. And for us, that has not necessarily been the case. And I'll refer people to the phenomena of cymatics, where you can play one frequency through a very large speaker with maybe a metal pan sitting on top with some sand. And when you play that, the sand turns into a different shape. But what we learned is, if it's a different material on the speaker, whether it's a different type of material that the sand is laying on, or maybe it's salt instead of sand, you'll get a different image. And so it's not just the frequency that's being played, it's the receiver of that frequency. And so each of us are very, very unique. And so we're not going to find just one frequency that works the same for all of us. But what we can do is, when we create these states of mind where you get into or states of being, really, states of consciousness, where you get into that profoundly relaxed state and your mind is still aware, that hypnagogic state, then you can use your intention. That intention can include attracting that feeling of unconditional love. And so it's a combination of things that we'll use, and you will definitely be engaged. Your being will be a part of this. This is not just a passive listening experience where you'll hear something and something will happen. That can be the case, but combined with intention and different generating of feelings of gratitude and other things that we recommend, that's how you can use sound to develop this way of creating that love inside and attracting that love to you from source. And so it's a combination of techniques and not just one frequency. And that's something that's really important to point out, because there are a lot of people out there who make that claim. It's just not something that we have been able to validate ourselves.
I would just add to that it's important to remember that when you review thousands and thousands of near-death experiences, no matter what their circumstance, and here I would include, for example, the kinds of deathbed visions that are reported, say, in a prison hospice setting, because I'm aware of those kind of reports where even in a prison that mainly has murderers and rapists and what have you, the kind of experiences that they uncover there in a deathbed vision are of love, this incredible love. It was clear to me that even though you can have perceptions of kind of negative and dark forces, especially like in a life review, if you've handed out a lot of pain and suffering to others, your life review might be a kind of a tough thing to go through. But the backdrop of the vast majority of these reported cases across all cultures, across all kinds of medical situations, is one of love, that we encounter that incredible divine loving force, that God force in those realms. And so as our meditations are able to take us deeply in, we'll start to experience what is the natural background setting for our existence, which is that realm of unconditional love. That is one of the most beautiful aspects of this that near-death experiencers bring back to this world. That's what enables them to have no fear of death ever again, because they realize it's not the end of their awareness, and that in fact their awareness comes into existence in this beautiful, infinitely loving ambience of those spiritual realms.
All right, perfect. Well, I knew our time was going to go so fast. This has been just a fascinating conversation. I want to thank our viewers for being with us today and for all of your really great questions, because you guys help make these conversations happen. So thank you for that. Once again, the near-death experience where spirituality and science meets begins Monday, August 17th at 11 a.m. And again, you can visit ndescienceandspirituality.com to learn more and to register. So, Eben and Karen, before we cut you loose, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm really looking forward to having as many people as possible to join us, because the more of us who can kind of come to these realizations and really inner knowings that there's more to us than our physical bodies, that our consciousness is eternal, that it continues beyond the death of the physical body, the more of us who can come to this knowing and understanding, the more we can really start to see our world change. And that is absolutely something that we have the opportunity to do right now with this COVID pandemic crisis that's going on all around the world. So much attention is being put on this, and many of us are in difficult situations. And it's precisely these kinds of challenges that we want people to realize are the real meat of life. This is how we have skin in the game, these challenges. And so this is a collective challenge that the entire globe is facing right now. And it really does indicate this we're all in this together kind of theory that Eben and I espouse, and that we will absolutely be discussing and making people really feel how they can be a part of all of that.
Yes, I agree completely. I'm very excited about this. It's it's one thing to share the emerging scientific worldview that supports every bit of this kind of awakening around consciousness, but even more important, and something that will certainly come out very clearly in every module of this course, is no soul left behind. We are all important in this. This evolution of consciousness that we're talking about is nothing more than the growth of individual souls in coming to realize more directly their relationship with the universe, their purpose for being, and the fact that we are all in this together. We're here to help each other, and through more readily expressing love and kindness, compassion, mercy, and acceptance, and when necessary, forgiveness, we can live much fuller lives. And that's what we hope to share with this audience. I look forward to the very engaged people of Shift Network. I think we're going to have a tremendously valuable time together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Eben and Karen. It's been just a pleasure speaking with you today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us.
All right, Lisa, thanks for having us on.
Yes, thank you.
All righty. And once again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. On behalf of all of us at the Shift Network, I wish you well and look forward to having you on this course or perhaps another one in the future. Have a great day, everyone.